Sure. Hey, how's it going there, friends? My name is Jeff Fritz, like Tony mentioned. I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. I work on the .NET team with a focus on community and bringing live video events to you, just like this one. I live here in the Delaware Valley. I have all my life, and it's good for you to know that there's a chunk of Microsoft Developer Division that is flowing through our region. That's a big commitment to the folks, to the technology in this area, and I want to make sure that you know that I'm here to support you, answer questions all throughout this session. Please, I have the chat room open. I am more than happy to answer your questions. Post them in chat. I'll grab them, find an appropriate place to pause in between demos, in between slides, and get back to you. And the hat I'm wearing today, I want to make sure I point out. Typically, when I go to events and speak, whether it's somewhere here in the States, somewhere in Europe, wherever it may be, I always return. And as I'm stepping off the plane at Philadelphia Airport, I always tweet, back in the 610. Well, here we are. We're presenting back in the 610. So let's talk about .NET 5. Let's talk about Blazor. Let's talk a little bit about C# 9. I'm not going to get too deep on each of these topics. I want to show a couple demos, and I want to leave the sessions later on in the event open to you that will go deeper on introducing Blazor, talking about C# 9. Going a little bit further on some of those topics. I have a session tomorrow talking about Blazor and Blazor components. So I hope you stop by for that one. And we talk about building components and how we can be really productive with that. But first, let's talk about .NET 5. Oh, and as Tony mentioned, you can find me on YouTube, Twitch, GitHub, and Twitter, C# Fritz. All right, let's talk about this. Let's get into this. It was the 10th anniversary of Netconf this year. That's our virtual event that we present from Microsoft. There's a significant local component. Hey, I recognize that guy there. And I've been proud to be a leader, a producer, an executive producer for this event for the past 5 years. Gosh. And we continue to move forward, innovating and bringing new content to it. And .NetConf has now become where we announce and where we launch significant new features of .NET. So this year, we announced the general availability of .NET 5. This is the next version of .NET that's been released. There's dozens of features in here, but here's just 6 bullets to get you started. Single file applications, smaller container images, web and cloud investments, Windows desktop development enhancements. This is a big jump for us to get Windows desktop into .NET, what was .NET Core, but is now .NET 5. ARM64 support, continued performance improvements, and that's really where you're going to find most of the work that we've done in .NET 5. And the big feedback that we hear from folks is the performance of your applications when you migrate to .NET 5. Not a lot of source code changes. Rebuild with .NET 5. Run on the .NET 5 runtime, and you see those performance improvements that everybody's happy about. Folks are happy to see. Folks love when you don't have to spend as much on a server and get better performance coming out of it. And of course, new C# 9, F# 5 language features, and we're going to go a little bit deep into some of those C# 9 features in my demos coming up here. Adoption. How much are people really using .NET? From our latest telemetry, we know that there are more than 5 million .NET developers out there. That's monthly active developers that use the Visual Studio family of products. There's more than 200,000 Windows developers that have migrated to .NET Core, building with WinForms and WPF. And more than 230,000 first-time .NET developers as of September 2020. And we've published more than 2 million applications to Linux from Visual Studio. And this is all based on some of that telemetry that you allow us to collect when you opt in using Visual Studio. Now, .NET 5 has changed a little bit from where we thought it was going to land. Of course, every technical product has kind of changed over the past year, if you know what I mean. I don't know if you noticed, there was this pandemic thing that happened. So scope changes, that's okay, but let's talk about where .NET 5 was planned to go and where it is now. So we had this original concept of, we've got the three .NETs, .NET Framework, .NET Core, Xamarin. And clearly, .NET Framework, build with Windows. .NET Core, build for the cloud, build those applications that work cross-platform. Mono and Xamarin, build for mobile, right? Build games, build when you need to get outside of the Microsoft environment, you need that ahead of time compilation. How's it going there, Bill? I see you full screen there on Teams. So our vision that we wanted to land here was one .NET, right? We did this a couple of years ago with ASP.NET. We wanted one web development platform. Well, now one .NET is where we targeted. One SDK, one system development kit, one base class library, the BCL, a unified tool chain. So you can build that cross-platform native user interface, cross-platform web user interface. We've already got that. Cloud native investment so that you can build and target deploying to the cloud, deploying to your data center, but have those cloud native technologies in the box, supported first-class citizens, and continue improving on speed, size, diagnostics, interactions with the various Azure services. And we wanted to make .NET the best of breed solution for all modern workloads. All right. This is your toolkit to do everything, and it works great for them. So that was the goal. What does this actually mean? Because you might have applications in .NET Framework 4.8, .NET Core 3.1, or various versions of Mono and Xamarin deployed to the various mobile devices, right? So .NET Framework 4.8, there's no more new features we're going to be deploying there, only fixes. This means that you're still going to get great support, still going to ship with Windows, still going to be able to build and target it, but you're not going to see some of the new features that folks want as we go to modern web development and modern application development. .NET Core 3.1, well, we're going to upgrade and make .NET Core 4, but that's kind of confusing. And we wanted to merge Mono and Xamarin into there, make this one single approach, one unified system that you can build with. Well, that's a little bit tricky. .NET Core 4, we already have .NET 4. So .NET Core 4 really starts to muddy the waters. If we're going to have a .NET Framework 4.8 and a .NET Core 4, it's confusing to be able to keep those separate. So the idea that we landed on was, we'll name this .NET 5. And because of pandemic, because of the scope of trying to merge in Mono and Xamarin, we're going to push that out to .NET 6 and make that the focus of that long-term servicing release that's going to come next November. So in this way, you get a very stable, performance-improved .NET 5 release that's a current release. That's a release that we're going to support for 3 months after .NET 6 comes out, and get you ready for .NET 6. Get you ready for when that Mono and Xamarin merge happens. But what's not in .NET 5? There's a bunch that has been put in there because it has all the things to work with Windows. But app domains, remoting, web forms, WCF server, Windows workflow, they remain on .NET Framework 4.8 only, with no plans to port. These are things that we've grown out of. We've got replacements that work great, and quite frankly, the web, the modern development workflow has moved beyond these products, has moved beyond these, and there are better ways to do these workloads that those features supported. So if you were working with app domains, check out assembly load context. If you were remoting into various servers before, you can still connect with named pipes. We recommend you check out gRPC. If you were doing web forms before, check out ASP.NET Blazor. Blazor runs server-side and in WebAssembly. I've got an ebook available out there that is on the Docs website you can find that talks through some of those steps, some of those migration techniques for you to take your web forms application and get it into Blazor. WCF server, if you were doing WCF interactions, once again, we recommend you check out gRPC, and there's an open source community project called Core WCF that you can check out that intends to give you that capability to have those WCF rich server-side interactions, but run on top of .NET Core and now .NET 5. If you were doing Windows workflow, there's an open source community project that has a lot of action on it called Core WF that you can find, and there's the GitHub link to that. Now, as we move forward, though, we're going to simplify the framework names as we bring these things together. No longer are we going to have Net Core App and these various Net standard names out there as well. We're going to have just Net 5.0 as the framework name. And .NET 5.0 runs everywhere. It combines and replaces the Net Core App and Net standard names. Now, there's a little bit more behind that bullet that we should talk about. .NET Standard has evolved, has met and satisfied its goals. It has provided that bridge so that we can bring them together, the various versions of .NET frameworks. The Xamarin components, the Windows components, they all reference the same base class library as we look at .NET 5, and we now can have just one framework. We don't need the various .NET standard interface versions, contract versions, to be able to push things back and forth. We only need .NET standard now if we need to target .NET framework in addition to .NET 5. And going forward, we have target framework monikers of Net 5.0 Windows that represent those operating system specific flavors of .NET. So where we had to bring in that Windows compatibility shim in order to build things that would target WinForms or WPF, well, now you specify the target framework of Net 5.0 Windows, and it will bring in and make those features available for you. As a library developer, you can also detect that framework that you're operating on and behave appropriately. Access things like Windows Registry, work with system drawing, and be able to access elements that appear on the display. So let me pause for a second. I see a question here from Colin asking, any plans for Microsoft to support Blazor on the desktop? Electron has a big footprint. This is something that we've been experimenting with. There are no solid plans at this point for Blazor on the desktop, and I'm going to talk about .NET 6 and what's going to be coming up are considerations for .NET 6 a little bit later on in the presentation, and you'll see why it's an experiment now, and we'll look at that for a roadmap for .NET 7 and later. So good question. I'm going to pin that for right now and come back to that in just a little bit. It is not in the roadmap for .NET 6. And while yes, Electron has a good footprint, a big footprint, there's a lot of problems with Electron apps as far as maintenance that folks need to address, and we want to make sure that we handle that appropriately when we go to issue our .NET version of an application like that. So the version numbers that you're going to see going forward are going to be .NET some version x.y-windows, .NET x.y-android, iOS, or some other operating system that we want to support, all under the headline of .NET some version number, x.y, so 6.0. If there's a 5.1 that we need to release, it would be .NET 5.1. Those are your framework monikers that you're going to see us using going forward in that format. So it's easy to understand, easy to adapt moving forward. So this is why we have Net Core App 3.1, Net Standard 2.1, and evolving and getting rid of those predicates in the names. So we end up with just Net 5.0, right? This is that unification of the various .NETs. So what will the Microsoft libraries target? What are the things that Microsoft is building? Well, we have the cross-platform libraries for ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework, all the system packages, and most of the libraries that we're building will target Net 5.0. All of our Windows controls, those components for Windows Forms, WPF, the managed UWP controls, they're all in Net 5.0 Windows. Cross-platform abstractions like Xamarin Essentials, Xamarin Forms, .NET MAUI, or other cross-platform abstractions will be targeting Net 5.0. Now, MAUI's going to slide a little bit. We'll talk about MAUI in a minute. But the cross-platform libraries that need to target .NET Framework also will be targeting Net Standard 2.0. So the Azure SDKs, the SQL client so you can work with SQL Server, those packages and more that Microsoft, not just the .NET team, but all of Microsoft is building that need to support .NET Framework, all target .NET Standard 2.0. All right, I get it. But what should I target? And that kind of leads into Ruth's question here. Let me read Ruth's question. Do I recommend that we migrate to .NET 5 now, or wait until .NET 6 is released and then migrate? This is a pretty common question that we get. The goal for the .NET team, and I hope this is something that you've seen for the last 20 years that we've been building .NET, the goal is to minimize the migration path going forward. We want to make it so that you don't have breaking changes. You don't have to do rewrites if you're staying with the same user interface framework, you're staying with the same business logic, and be able to continue using your code with minimal changes going forward. So we have a portability analyzer that you can run that will tell you what you may need to change, give recommendations for what you want to modify to get into .NET 5. There's also the try.net tool that's available that you can use that, try convert, not try.net. There's a try convert that will try to convert to .NET 5 and report back what the problems are. It'll do that minimal set of changes and report back and say, this works, this doesn't work. So there's opportunities there to get feedback to get into .NET 5. For the performance gains that you're going to see, I absolutely recommend you get into .NET 5 if the places that you're targeting support that. I'll talk about that in a minute. The places that you want to deploy to. Azure App Service supports it. Docker containers that support it. Because you can package up and deliver Windows applications as a single file executable. You can deploy and run those on all the current supported versions of Windows. Fantastic. So the path then to get to .NET 6, we want to make sure is buttery smooth, real easy to get there, so that all you have to do is change the version number and recompile. And that was something that you could get away with. You could absolutely do in many of the .NET Framework versions. Make sure you have the current runtime installed, change the version number, recompile, and it just worked. And for the most part, that was the case, unless you were really doing some things that were on the outsides. But we've built tools that will detect and report back to you, hey, you should go and address this issue before doing the update. So knowing that folks should be maintaining their applications on a regular basis, you want to keep up with security patches, security issues that are sent out on the web for, hey, make sure you're handling all these different things that are happening, the new technologies that are coming up, make sure you're handling them properly. We're already building and integrating on a very regular basis. To go and say, well, just upgrade to the next version, we want to make sure that you can do that easily and that it's part of your regular cadence. And hopefully with the schedule that we're publishing, that becomes something that you can schedule into your project lifetime. so that your products remain current, get the best of the performance updates that we provide, get the best of the tooling and productivity updates that we provide, and you end up being done faster at the end of the day. Get done your job. So I absolutely do recommend get to .NET 5, and you'll be even happier when you get to .NET 6. We really don't want to see folks who have that .NET Framework 2.0 application that's been around for 15 years. Nobody's touched it in 10 years. All the original developers have moved on. Nobody knows how to maintain it. We want to make sure that we take proper care in feeding of our applications moving forward so that they are maintainable, so that they are getting the best of and taking advantage of modern tools. So thank you for the question, Ruth. Really appreciate it. And like I said, that leads into this slide. Continue to use .NET Standard if you're sharing code between .NET Framework and other platforms. The key thing is if you're using and targeting .NET Framework. Even if you have an application that's only using .NET Framework, get your business logic into a .NET Standard class library. Upgrade that class library to .NET Standard 2.0, because when you do need to migrate from .NET Framework to .NET 5, .NET 6, whatever version going forward, you're eventually going to want to do that. You already have your business logic in a format that doesn't need to be rewritten, doesn't need to be rebuilt, and you can literally just reference it from your next user interface application, whether it's WinForms, WPF, we'll talk about .NET MAUI, Blazor, ASP.NET, you'll be able to reuse that code. Consider using .NET Standard 2.1 to share code between Mono, Xamarin, and .NET Core 3.x. This is a recommendation that the team has. I'm not entirely sold on it, because if you need things that target .NET Standard 2.1, you're not targeting .NET Framework. Just go into .NET 5, .NET 6. Just jump right into the third bullet. Go to .NET 5 for code sharing moving forward. It's easy to target. It's the one target framework to rule them all going forward. So that's where I personally think we should be thinking going forward. .NET Standard 2.1 really felt like a bump in the road as we were moving along. So that's great, Jeff. You've talked about the various .NETs and the versions that are changing here. I use Visual Studio. Great. Visual Studio 2019 16.8 is at general availability. 16.9 is at preview. I believe we're at preview 3 right now. .NET 5 is in the box. There's all kinds of productivity enhancements in there, including IntelliCode team completions. There's IntelliCode detection for repeated actions, where it'll come back and suggest, if you do the same action several times, it'll come back and start suggesting for you, hey, why don't we just do this again, so you can have quick keystrokes to do repeated tasks after you do something. I think it's 3 times. It'll start automating that for you. There's an improved Git experience. It's brand new. It's a lot easier to use in Visual Studio, and it's really more Git flavored than it is Visual Studio VSTS rebranded for Git. Debugging into Linux, an improved XAML experience, much improved XAML experience with hot reloading and a bunch of other tools in there for you. You can build GitHub Actions, deploy to GitHub Actions directly from Visual Studio. When you do that right-click deploy from Visual Studio, that would generate that hidden deployment script behind the scenes that you could watch happen. You can now have it generate GitHub Actions for you, and you'll get a great continuous development and deployment experience using GitHub Actions going forward. Check that out. Get a copy of Visual Studio 2019 at visualstudio.com/download. If you're on the preview track, check it out at aka.ms/vs-preview. Now, if you're in Visual Studio and you're building that way, we need to talk about Windows desktop apps. So Windows desktop apps have leveled up significantly with .NET 5, right? We broke away from .NET Framework, forced a rebuild, forced you to migrate, because high DPI is a thing. And as much as we fought with high DPI and tried to make it work with .NET Framework, the 4.7s and 4.8, it was really hard to do. So if you get into .NET Core 3.1 and now .NET 5, you get great support for high DPI displays. You now have designers for Windows Forms and WPF. That was one of those last hurdles that a lot of folks had before they could say, I want to build with Windows Desktop using .NET Core, .NET 5. Much improved Visual Studio tooling for building with the Windows Desktop frameworks. Click Once Installer is back. That was something that we didn't expect, but a lot of people said, hey, we need to get Click Once working. Third-party tools, controls, the control vendors all have support for their form controls, WPF controls that work with .NET 5. And you get all those benefits of .NET 5. Those single-file EXEs, my goodness. Deploying a .NET Framework app and being able to deploy just the EXE because you knew the framework was on the system, well, you can do that now, and we're still going to bundle up and give you a true single file EXE. I don't know if you tried this with .NET Core 3.1, but we kind of faked it out, where we actually put all the DLLs into the EXE, and when you would double click to run the EXE, it unzipped. It effectively unzipped the EXE, put the DLLs on disk, and ran it there. Well, we've got that fixed now, and it's a true single file EXE, and it works great. No need for .NET Framework on the machine. You get amazing performance, and you're going to get modern controls. WebView 2. WebView 2, that's the web browser plugin, web browser control or component that you can use for WPF and for Windows Forms that comes from Microsoft Edge, right? You're going to get that great browser experience that you can embed in your applications using the WebView 2 component. And moving past desktop apps, I've got to talk about Blazor, my favorite of the component of the user interface libraries. Where's my Blazor hat? I don't see my Blazor hat here. Look, Blazor is our modern web development framework, component-based, and runs on the server and in the browser using WebAssembly. Every browser has WebAssembly. It shipped with HTML5, so you can build with C# and deploy and run your applications in the browser. Huge enhancements for running in the browser using .NET Core. Using the .NET 5 core framework libraries. This means you don't have the mono libraries, a slightly different version of the runtime running in the browser. No. Now it's the exact same .NET 5 libraries that run on your Windows machine, on your Mac, on your Linux machine. They all are the same core framework, and they run in the browser now as well. 3 times faster than the previous release. I've got a couple applications out there that I've built and deployed, and I don't have folks coming back and saying, gosh, that runs really slow. No. Folks don't know that they're running a .NET app in the browser. It's just another application. It runs quickly, and because of how we do tree shaking, how we link together the code, it runs so fast. You won't be able to tell the difference. Server-side pre-rendering, when you host your WebAssembly app on top of an ASP.NET Core server app, an ASP.NET Core application, so it runs on the server, you can pre-render that content and lazy load your dependencies when you're working with ASP.NET Core. Component virtualization is easily my favorite feature of this, because where it takes that idea that we had for how many years of building a grid or a repeater or a data list, you're listing data on screen, and you have to have some sort of a pager because you only want to get 10 to 20 items at a time. You're not loading up an entire table of millions of records. Well, that virtualization that you see when you go to your favorite social media site, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, what have you, and you're just scrolling and there's a constant list of content, it's in the box and you can do it so easily. Really great stuff. I see a question there from Colin. Let me come back to that in just a minute. when I finish this slide. There's CSS and JavaScript isolation. You can easily tag and connect your components. They're appropriate CSS and JavaScript that may be necessary to work with your components. Have them load and be specific to just your component. A couple new components of note: input file support, so you can load files using load process files using Blazor WebAssembly. And there's a growing ecosystem of third-party controls tools. Check out the awesome Blazor post out there on GitHub. If you Google for it, awesome-Blazor, Google with Bing for it, awesome-Blazor, you'll see a list of great tools, components, samples, demos that you can run out there. Somebody even got, what is it, Doom 3 running on top of WebAssembly in the browser. Somebody else got Diablo running on top of Blazor in the browser. Really cool stuff. Let me pause and take Colin's question here. Does .NET support COM interfaces? If not, what's a strategy recommended to interface with third-party apps libs that currently only support COM? Ooh. COM is something that we should be moving well beyond. Those COM interfaces have been deprecated, moved, left for something that we want to migrate away from. If you're interfacing with something that's COM, I would take that .NET framework library that works with it and wrap it and provide a shim so that you can access that from .NET 5. Let me dig into that a little bit more. Let me go get some information on that. I haven't done any investigation into working with COM with .NET 5, but it is something that we're trying to move folks away from. Drop me a line on Twitter. Let's talk about that. I want to make sure I give you the right answer as to what that migration path looks like, because it is something that we should be moving away from. Keeping an eye on my time here. Tony, what, I've got about 20 minutes? C# 9. Let's talk about the new version of C# that delivered here. There's a bunch of new features that shipped as part of C# 9. This is probably the most excited that I've been about a version of the programming language in years. There's a lot to be said with this. The big things I can show you here. I want to make sure I save time for our friend Scott Kay, who's going to be doing a talk about C# 9 a little bit later. But I do a show on Monday mornings on the Visual Studio channel called C# with C# Fritz. And I have some demos that I can show you real quick about some of those features. Here's my Visual Studio running a demo here, and I'll give you a link to these demos so you can download and take a look at them. This is a simple console application. You can see my application is running .NET 5. C# 9 only works on .NET 5. It will not work on older versions of the framework. There's a series of demos that I have here. I'm not going to go through all of them. We'll probably go through records and top-level programs, just because I want to make sure I have time to show you a little bit of that Blazor demo and get in and talk about Maui a little bit. So when we talk about building objects, reference objects with .NET, we think about always building classes, right? You have classes and structs are your two primary ways to build objects with C#, right? Structs are value objects, classes are reference objects. So I can define a class for a person, and that's kind of a garden variety person class. First name, last name. We have a toString method that has the first name, last name, and we can create a constructor that is a easily defined here. It's receiving these two values and drop it in, decompose those two values into these two properties. Easy, piece of cake. We can define a record similarly by specifying those properties, and the record is a reference type. It's a new reference type that compiles and generates the same structure behind the scenes, but it's immutable. So we don't have sets on our properties. You can't change them. We've got a constructor that defines and allocates those property values appropriately, And we can easily define a person class and interact with it like that, or we can use the record. So I can create a new person this way, and I can also create, where's that record? There we go, a new person that way. So it looks and behaves the same in both instances. That's great. I don't want to do. Why aren't we getting this? Yeah, they're two different objects. I had this as a new person. I know what I did. I don't want to do that one yet. I don't want to do this one. It was this demo is the first one, right? It's the exact same object. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same behavior. But what the record does, I'm not even going to run this. I'm running out of time here. The record, not only does it give you this immutable object that you can't change on the fly, right? I can't come through and change these the names of things here, right? If I try to do because person is a record object, if I try to say first name equals Tony, right? You can see already this is coming back and saying, well, it's read only. Even if these weren't read only, if it was a proper, right, a proper record here with gets and sets, it won't let me do this because that's a record, right? And actually, why isn't it showing me the underline there? Let me show the second bit of demo code here. Because records are reference objects, we can also inherit from them, and we also have this short notation with this ordinal properties. Because I define a cool person record that has these two constructors in this order, I can create a person object in that order, right? It becomes really easy for me to define and work with this. So when you have those plain old C# objects, those POCOs, that are just carrying along a little bit of information, don't have any real logic that go with them, this is real easy for me to pass around. I can define a cool person like this, and now if I try to interact and say first name equals Tony, now it tells me, oh, wait a sec, it's only allowed to be assigned through an object initializer. You can't change this. You can't change the object, the record, after it's been built. So I can do that, and I can define another record that inherits from the first one using the same notation that I had in C# to inherit from a base class. So I have one record inheriting from another. I've defined a rock star object that inherits from a cool person, but a rock star also has a property called band name. So I can define Freddie Mercury, Queen, and that's a rock star. Man, I'm showing my age. Moving on, the last bit of the demo that I want to show, and I know I'm not actually working through this, is these are immutable objects. You can't change these. So what if I need to enhance them? What if I need to define a new record? Well, I can change them by actually creating a cloned copy of it. This comes in the box with a record. It does this by default. So if I define a cool person, Jeff Fritz, I'll be able to decompose back into the various properties because of that ordinal property location. I can decompose back into first, last, and I can write that out. I also get a default toString method that we can take a look at as well. But I can clone and create a new record and forget and start working with the new one instead by using this with notation. With curly braces, the name of the property I want to change and the value you want to assign. So now I can create a new value and call this, right, I'm going to take the cool person, Jeff Fritz, change the first name to Scott, and I'll get Scott Fritz coming out. So I'll actually run that one. And you'll see that it's easily being delivered for me. And, right, I define Jeff Fritz, and here's the two-string format that I get by default. The type of my record and each property in the order they're defined with the values that are in there. So it's cloned the Jeff Fritz object and changed the first name for us. It's pretty easy to understand, and because they're immutable, when they're no longer referenced, it's real easy to destroy those and clean up, do that garbage collection, and make our applications run a little bit faster. About 10 minutes to go here. I also want to talk about top-level programs. So you would have to define a program like this. Namespace, class, static void main, static args. Ugh. If you have just a couple lines of code that you want to run, you can get right into console.writeline. In fact, I don't even need the using statements, right? I can do something as simple as, right, grab system and put that in front of here and comment that out. And now I've got just 2 lines of code that runs my sample, runs my console application. Why would you do this? And I can also pass arguments in. Args is available as an array, a string array that you can work with. But why would you do this? Maybe you've got some simple code to load data into an application. Maybe you've got some simple code to do a conversion from one format to another. You can write that at the top level. Put your code that you need to reference inside of a NuGet package, a class library that is already running in your production system, and you want to test and run locally. You want to do that migration. You want to interact with and show some simple features, whatever it might be. You don't have to write a lot of code just to get that very quick interaction. It becomes also easy to train people, teach new features, because you have this very simple way to write code without all the minutia of working with namespaces and classes and instances of the class, static instances of the class, the static instance of the class. It all goes away and we just have top-level code that we can write. So we're pretty happy with this. We think this is something that is going to make folks more productive in how they work with .NET. Let me head back over here. Let me move along. Got about 10 minutes left here. .NET 5 is now available on Azure App Service. It was available on launch day, and the .NET releases are going to be available on day 1 on App Service going forward. No more waiting for the next version to be available. Deploy to a Docker container just so you can get it running on Azure. It's going to be available day 1 going forward. Those preview releases you're going to be able to work with confidently and know that you're going to get the full versions available on Azure ready to go when you're ready to deploy. And they're production ready. Speaking of deploying to Azure, oh, look at that. I'm looking at the wrong slide here. I'm going to talk about Blazor before I get back into Azure. Blazor in .NET 5 had three main themes, and it was really targeted as something to be a hardening around this. We wanted to improve the developer experience. We don't need to add significant new features, but we want to make it easier and faster for you to develop with. We wanted to improve performance on WebAssembly because we heard, hey, is Blazor ready for enterprise development? And we also wanted to fill any feature gaps that folks were saying, well, we can't really work with this yet. It's not really ready for us. So the new features that we've made available in .NET 5 include, I mentioned CSS isolation, auto refresh. If you run .NET Watch Run on the command line for a Blazor app, it automatically refreshes the browser as those components change, as your code updates. It automatically does the rebuild and makes it available in the browser, refreshing the browser for you. Packages auto add their own CSS and JavaScript, better debugging experience. Input file support, virtualization, I want to show you that in just a second here. And Azure Static Web Apps integration. That one cannot be understated. I've really fallen in love with those last two features. Azure Static Web Apps is tremendous. Think about it. A Blazor WebAssembly app can run on just static HTML. Just serve an HTML page that references the DLLs to load for your Blazor app. This way, you can deploy to a static website. Those Blazor DLLs are downloaded, and all your interactions happen with Azure Functions. We have that available now as a GitHub template. You can clone and build a complete solution using Azure Functions and Blazor WebAssembly. Let me head over to the other demo that I have here. This is an application that I've been building live on stream called ClipTalk. And in particular, this is the front page of ClipTalk, and it shows clips from Twitch that folks are interacting with. So I have a collection of discoverable clips that are loaded behind the scenes here in my class. So I have, there they are, discoverable clips. These are loaded from a service behind the scenes and painted using this virtualized component. Now, the virtualized component is kind of like a virtual for loop. It's not just going to do a for loop over your content, but it's also going to track where we are on screen and emit a placeholder appropriately if the content hasn't loaded yet. But if it has, and it's going to try and load the couple of objects that are just off screen, if it has loaded, we're going to show, in my case, I created this clip component to show that data on screen. So let me bring up, and I will show you what this looks like running on the production website. I'll go to cliptalk.com, and I have a loading, and here it is. My placeholder is showing while I'm waiting for my content to load, and I'm going to see clips from Twitch. Each one of these is a component, and they're loading as I scroll. I've got 100 of these sitting here, and it's loading as I scroll. Notice the scroll bar on the right side. It knows how big the page is, and as I scroll, it goes in. You see a quick refresh as it brings in the next block of data. I'm showing video players here and images that I'm lazy loading, and I'm bringing into the mix as content arrives. This is all built for me. I didn't have to write additional code. I didn't have to write anything to detect and go fetch appropriate data. No, it's doing this for me appropriately. Really cool stuff. I've been building this application as a Blazor static web app. So my client app that you see here, this is a WebAssembly app. It targets .NET 5, Razor Language 3. I've got SAS files in here, but it works with a Azure Functions app. Now, Azure Functions don't target .NET 5 yet, and that's okay. But I've got a bunch of functions here that I can interact with and get data to present on the screen. And there's how I get clips to present on the screen. Go get it from a blob or from my cache and return that data, right? That data, there it is. Real easy to work with. And as I commit code into my repository for this, and this source code is not available. I haven't published this. But what you can see is there's actions that run behind the scenes that automatically deploy my .NET project with continuous integration, continuous deployment out to Azure. Even more so than that, as there's a pull request, and I can show you a pull request over here, as these are submitted, it reviews the pull request, does the build, and makes a staging version of the site available so I can click through and see and verify that the website is working. And it'll keep instances of that available for me while the pull request is open so we can tinker with it, make sure that it works properly, and when the pull request is merged, it'll delete, it'll destroy that staging instance out there on Azure and take me back to having just my production instance ready. This is all free. Those staging slots are free for you to use. There's no cost to working with those, and you get a great experience building and deploying immediately to Azure. Really great stuff. It only deploys when I merge into my main branch. All right. So I'm absolutely enjoying using virtualization and Azure Static Web Apps with Blazor. A couple more things I want to talk about as we wrap up here. I mentioned about working with the cloud. Yes, go ahead, check off all of those. Something that we've been tinkering with that we're building towards is something called Project Tie. Project Tie is an experiment that we're working through that will help you build, debug, and deploy your microservices faster. We know that building with containers, building and referencing with things when you want to deploy to an orchestrator like Kubernetes is tricky to do. So how do you do that in development and also ship and have a great experience in the cloud? That's what Project Tie is going to do. You get configuration conventions that you can reference in Tie that will automatically bring together your microservices so they can work together. Add references to things like Redis, SQL Server, what have you, without having to build new Docker files. Like I said, run, debug locally using containers, Kubernetes, and when you're ready, you can deploy to Azure Kubernetes Service. It's all set and ready to go. Let me skip forward a couple slides here to talk about the .NET schedule. Xamarin Forms is ready to go. We deployed .NET 5 in November 2020. November 2021 is when .NET 6 is scheduled to be released. There will be a Netconf in November 2021, and that's when we're going to ship .NET 6. That's our long-term servicing release that has 3 years support. You will see a major release every November, and those even-numbered releases will be our long-term servicing release. This way, you have that predictable schedule so that you can schedule your work, schedule your migrations appropriately, because you know exactly when versions of .NET are arriving. All right. I'm going to jump right to the end here, and we could be talking about .NET MAUI. .NET MAUI is coming soon. We have a series of themes that are coming as part of .NET 6. You can find these at themes of .NET. We start with top-level themes that turn into pillars, and those pillars have user stories that eventually have issues that belong to them. You can see all of what we're planning at themes of .NET, and that's a website that just sits right on top of our GitHub, and you can chime into those issues that are open out there. You can interact with them and the team as they're planning these and see exactly what we're working on. .NET MAUI is going to be part of .NET 6. That's our multi-platform app user interface. But I am out of time. Thank you so much, friends. I really appreciate you joining us. There's so much more going on with .NET 5, our preparation for .NET 6. I hope you check out all of the things that our product teams are talking about on the Visual Studio channel on Twitch and on the .NET channel on YouTube. Thanks so much, friends.